Hey, it's Chris. We're talking Mindclash and Ironwood. They sent it to me. I love two-player asymmetric duelers. Did I love this one? No, that's not the right question. How much did I love this one? Are you ready? It's definitely on the short list for games of the year. That good. Why? Let's go. At surface value, Ironwood is a 1 versus 1 asymmetric dueling rebellion versus empire style game. When you dig deeper, though, you start to see the nuances of each of these factions, with the Woodwalkers slashing and nipping at the Achilles heel of the Ironclad as the Ironclad slowly tightens their grip on the area as a whole, both sides equally wanting to be the aggressor, to be the one to achieve victory in two asymmetric, dynamic ways that the game offers you. And the asymmetry is spread throughout all aspects. And the main being this deck of cards, of 38 cards that the game comes with on each side. And these cards are almost all unique in what is offered. So the asymmetry and the depth of complexity is exactly where I want it to be. It's not in the rule book, right? It's not this thick in order to achieve this much depth. What makes this game so great, though, is the tension that is almost palpable as you react on a round by round, turn by turn basis, watching your opponent slide out their first, second, or third consecutive alternating action to oppose immediately precedingly what you may have done in the first place to counter what they had just been attempting to do. The outmaneuvering, outclevering, and outthinking your opponent on what is presented and what is reacted to on a turn-by-turn basis is what makes this game so incredibly unpredictable and overwhelmingly awesome. Part of that wonderfulness is the vast unpredictability and the fact that whoever thinks fastest on their feet, but also is able to strategically look more than just what's immediately in front of them, will ultimately, most likely, end up being the victor. It is driven by the dynamics and the maneuvers that are provided to you on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis with the hand that is in front of you. And that hand is not only limited to the special cards which you are acquiring on a turn-by-turn basis, but also the 3 stays in your hand as well of cards that will never go anywhere, that are your go-to backup in case all else fails, or sometimes, just frankly speaking, also the best cards that are available at the time for what you need in order to deal with the dynamics that are on the board. Both the Woodwalkers and the Ironclad have both of theirs stayed tried and true in that manner. The main point that is not quite evident on the board here is you've got the Ironclad surrounding Ferrum in the middle, guarding their host and treasure of crystals, the ever popular supply for basically all of the things that you want to do in the game. Whereas the Ironclad can mine it through the use of the moving drill between locations and then dumping at the forge in order to utilize them, the Woodwalkers, like I mentioned, are going to nip at the corners and the heels and the weak spots in between via the forests as they traverse, trying to make their way to the center, not only to acquire the gems and the crystals in order to power and employ their own troops, but then also to find totems that are hidden, lurking in these inner forest areas that need to be reclaimed, gathered, maneuvered, and then escape to one of the outer forests. Meanwhile, the established titans of the Ironclad are basically just putting down foundations, literally, in areas of the mountains that they control already. And once they've established their base there with more dominance and absolute authority, then you can flip them over to the forge side, which is one of 3 that they need, opposite the 3 totems that the Woodwalkers are going to need head to head. And again, the dynamic of the forges versus the totems seems relatively straightforward at surface value here. That's where the Woodwalkers come in a little bit differently with their vision cards, because you're going to be drawing these cards in a random, unpredictable manner that only the Woodwalkers will know, but the Ironclad will try to peek in on to figure out where one of these may come up, because you have to play them in order to find them, in order to gather them. And the differences don't stop there. And this game, in case it's not abundantly clear at this point, with the nuance of the asymmetry on both sides, is not just a gather your troops and sort of maneuver. It is a slash and harry style game with the spoils and the victor going with the aggressor, because both sides are more realistically like a war game rather than a two-player dueling fencing épée style of things. Whereas you have your exceeds or your yomis or your battle cons or even any of those style in a very, very controlled manner. And that is accomplished again by the use of these cards that are going to be maneuvering, because again, it's not just the cards, it's actual troops movement as well. The Ironclad can move in bunches and circle and snare the Woodwalkers. The Woodwalkers, though, are constrained to not being able to move in bands of any more than one at a time in order to facilitate troop dispersal, but also the totem acquisition. And thematically incorporated, the forges, the metal that is there stands the test of time. A forge is forged and forged forever. But the totem, in the passing transience, that is more of the wooden style products, even in our day and age, well, it only stays around for 2 turns if nobody is there, and then it fades away into obscurity and it's lost. So the Woodwalkers then have to find another vision in order to achieve their end goal, which again is easier said than done, as it adds another step to their process as opposed to the foundation into the forge on the Ironclad aspect. As being the Empire, the Ironclad maneuvers around the board, gathering crystals, using its own individual track in order to gain bonus resources and cargo that is ultimately delivered back to the forge when deposited, but only when deposited, and also vulnerable to attack in the meantime. And that is when the Woodwalkers strike. They strike at the weak points. They strike at the core center of the base. They destabilize the Ironclad in the first place. And this extension extends into the actual combat of the game as well, which is represented by, well, the influence of the actual characters on the board in the first place, but then also with the Mindclash deterministic style battle of bid a card and see what happens. Because again, each card has values of aggression, defense, and influence on them. And depending on who is the aggressor and what aspects or avenues you're looking at, both sides have their own strengths. With the Ironclad being more attack heavy, less defense, and less domination and influence. But the Woodwalkers having more ability to dominate with the influence aspect, so all they have to do is stay and survive and not be eliminated in a battle in order to actually win it. And in combat, although more troops often means win, it is necessarily not decided in that way because of the cards wagered alongside of it, where you're going attack versus defense, and then any damage dealt removes troops. If troops are remaining on either side, then the victor is actually the most influential, which typically is, well, does not the strength of the Ironclad, but more the Woodwalkers, even though the Ironclad have the numbers game and the heavier attack and sometimes even defense. So the balance of the yin and yang between both elements there is ever present in all aspects and avenues of the mechanics that are incorporated on a turn by turn, round by round, phase by phase in this game. The other aspect that you may worry about with such a sprawling map, with all of these different forest locations and all of the different forge and mountain positions that can be taken up for defense or offensive purposes, well, you don't have to fret, because inner combat is where it's going to take place. The outer rim of the areas, although you can muster troops and you can defensive and fortify, the majority of the crux of the game has to be accomplished via the inner workings of the inner ring. Forges can only be made on the outer rings where their control is lesser, and the Woodwalkers' totems can only be gathered from the inner forests. The harrying on the outside is also limited, as you cannot attack the outer forests, or they cannot be attacked from. The other aspect that limits that, but also makes it more strategic at the same time, is units can only be moved once on a turn. So whether it is moving them as a group, or whether that is moving them individually, each unit gets one, with a few minor exceptions, via the asymmetric card dynamics that will be offered just once in a while from that aspect of things. Does the game overstay its welcome? No. This is an hour or less. Now, the other main criticism or crux of this could be that because you have only so many cards, Chris, because that is the depth of the game in a nutshell, that the asymmetry is not going to provide replayability. But this game, I'll argue, doesn't get its long-lasting legs from the variety that is going to be in here, but it's from the actual maneuvering and the meta that evolves after repeated plays. It is one of those games. If you are looking for an absolutely fresh, utter new experience every time, no, that's not going to be it. That is where the strength of these asymmetric games come in, is repeated knowledge of what you have offering, what your opponent can do, and the outthink and outplay from previous experiences. Similar to chess in that regard, how previous iterations and examples are then used to build upon so that you're better prepared and offering for what may come in the future and better able to deal with it and mitigate it and create some of those chances that you're looking for in the first place. Now, it is a little bit analysis paralysis prone, because you will have up to 8 of these cards, including your 3 mainstays, on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis. And so that's probably the biggest downside of looking through all of these cards, seeing that you have multiple actions, multiple options on almost every single one, and then deciding between how you're going to use them here as a one-time off, or whether or not they're going to be worth keeping and wagering for an offensive maneuvering or a defensive influence gathering or anything in between. Therein lies probably the biggest downside of this game in a nutshell, because it could very easily extend the game length to a little bit of a slog or a pigs grunting through mud style of things if you have people who are more prone to that. The Woodwalkers are slightly weaker overall, but they're compensating for that by basically Robin Hooding the game against the Ironclad, stealing the resources that are much more hard to gather with their limited use cards here in terms of what they can do and how they maneuver and recruit differently and just more dynamically. And they utilize the resources that the Ironclad takes advantage of or takes for granted in the first place. And it's that balancing act that is so dynamically fun in the game. I would argue that probably as a first-time player, the Ironclad is a lot easier. The resources come smoother, they come and flow like the spice, and the totems, truth be told, are harder to get to sometimes with the limited vision cards, as well as the fading of them away before you can grasp them. Especially if the Ironclad is tightening their steel gauntlet around the area where it's located in the first place. So all in all, final thoughts on this one. This game rewards strategic maneuvering 2 or 3 turns ahead, or 2 or 3 times ahead, as you're playing 3 cards per round back and forth, one by one. And the ability to play them and interact and dynamically react to your opponent is the strength and core of this game in a nutshell. And it does it so well. I was worried that it was going to be too complex. I was worried that the overhead was going to be too great. I was worried that it was just going to be an excess of riches now that we see this on crowdfunding all the times, where if some is good, too much is just enough. And it escapes that trap quite nicely. The thematic incorporation of both the Ironclad as well as the Woodwalkers, it makes sense in all aspects and avenues, and it really does a thematic incorporation. And I just don't see others doing it in quite the same way to give me that quite same feeling that this does, even though I'm not usually that type of person in the first place where that really matters. The other big take home is that this is the war of the aggressive. This is more of a war game than it is a 2-player asymmetric anything else that I've mentioned, Battlecon, Yomi, Exceed, Summoner Wars, anything along those lines. This is more troop maneuvering, outmaneuvering, outreacting, flanking, those aspects just done in a semi-irregular hexagonally grid-ish based system of the map that you can see in front of me. And it does it oh so smoothly, oh so well. Of the dynamics of forcing the interactions of only having the forge being on the inside core strength and forcing them to go the outside to achieve their victory, and vice versa with the Woodwalkers trying to rob and Robin Hood in the middle in order to pay for Paul to get the totems and escape with them successfully, Ocean's 11 style. And it just does it in such an amazing way that this is easily going to be a top 10 game of the year for me. This has real potential to be the game of the year as well. So that's it. Mindclash, Ironwood. If you like this style of game and this sounds good to you, I highly recommend this. That's all I got. Stay classy. Comments, questions, concerns down below. Subscribe, thumb it. Thanks for watching. Peace out. See you around.